With a steady firm tug on my arm, Miss Monroe took me out of the study class and led me back into the corridor. "Oh, you may keep the handkerchief, I have plenty more just like that one. I shall at the soonest moment possible talk to Mrs. Watson about you." Miss Monroe soon turned on her heels and walked away. I held the laced handkerchief in my hands, staring at it. I had failed again, as much as I did not want to spoil the delicate and sweet perfumed laced handkerchief, and I blew my nose. Now I was really upset. Not only had I failed, but I had just gone and put my foot right in it. There was only one real way of getting out of not seeing Mrs. Watson, and that was not to turn up at the college tomorrow. I had a feeling that as soon as Miss Monroe tell Mrs. Watson about me, she would want to see me at her soonest convenience, which would be tomorrow, especially as soon as Miss Monroe tells Mrs. Watson exactly what I had just told to her. I knew that at least I would be able to get away with not attending college, being the star pupil of the arts class, and if I call in sick, I would not be questioned. Miss Monroe had not as so much given me a hug, which was even more upsetting. I returned to my flat, feeling utterly gutted. I had to somehow get myself to be a part of the feminist study class, but there was only one real option, and I did not relish the thought of what I had to do in order for me to achieve my goal. I had no choice but to call up my mother and be prepared to stay over for a few days, for I knew that just a quick visit would not be enough to convince her. In order for her to help me, I would have to swallow my pride and try to endure a few days' worth of humiliation. I rang my mother up. She was quite surprised to hear my voice on the phone. To my surprise, I found out that I would not have to stay for a few days, because if I did that, I would have to agree to go back and live with her. My mother had decided that I will have to learn everything the hard way. If I truly wanted her help with something, yes, I would have to pay the ultimate price, and I accepted, of course, because I was desperate enough to do so. I did not go to college as planned, but I got a concerned telephone call from Mrs. Watson. I lied to her, of course, telling her that my mother was actually with me and that we were making things up to each other, so I no longer needed her help. Mrs. Watson was easier to convince than I first thought, but I was not looking forward to spending even just the one day with my mother, which was exactly on the day I had phoned her, which was on Tuesday. I had soon arrived at my mother's house, and she immediately took me into the ballroom, where hung out for me was a pretty frilly pink tutu, which I knew that I had to wear for the rest of my stay with my mother. If I ever thought that having to trounce around my mother's hose like a fairy was humiliating, then nothing can compare with what fate lay ahead of me and what I had to do for my punishments. When I began to explain of my desire to my mother of the feminist study class one so much wanted to be a part of, without having to even explain why, my mother was already in approval. I already was keeping up to my agreement, and so my mother made a personal call directly to the head dean's home number, Mrs. Hilary Farrow. After explaining and revealing to Mrs. Farrow the circumstances for my needing to attend the feminist study course and a small bribe, I was soon granted the right to attend and be a student of the study class. But this did mean a gradual change in my life. To become a girl, not only that, I had to give up all of my chances of getting my master's degree in art. I had to agree to start wearing girls' clothes after my first few days attending the feminist study class, upon which I did agree on, knowing then that I would have to find a way to leave Blakely altogether in order to escape my fate.